Hey yo, you know who we haven't really talked about in a minute? None other than the legend himself, Mr. Stan Lee, the mastermind behind Spiderman, the X-Men, and all those Marvel icons that blew up our lives. So let's take a wild ride into the dark final moments of Stan's life, a time when the man who built worlds was being pushed around by some seriously shady characters. Now, sit tight, cause we're about to break down what went down in those final years of the Marvel Master's life in a way that is as raw and unfiltered as it gets. First off, imagine this. You are a giant in the comic book universe, a guy who put his blood, sweat and tears into creating heroes that have inspired generations, and then suddenly, in your later years, you are surrounded by a crew of people who treat you less like the legend you are and more like a walking cash cow. That is right. Even the father of Spider-Man was not immune to exploitation, manipulation, and straight up betrayal when he needed genuine care the most. The dark final moments of his life weren't about all celebrating his epic legacy. They were riddled with abuse and heartache that hardly anyone talks about. Now, let me break it down for you like this. Stan was in his twilight years, battling health issues, and still being parted around for photo ops and comic cons, all while the people around him, some of whom were once his closest confidants, were out there trying to milk every last drop of cash from his name. And here's the kicker, it wasn't just about signing autographs or selling memorabilia. Nah, it went way deeper. We're talking about elder abuse, manipulation, and downright exploitation that stretched over decades. So picture this scenario. You are Stan, the man who brought us Spider-Man and the Avengers, and instead of being respected as a creative genius, you are basically treated like an object. Someone's telling you, hey Stan, do this, do that, just because they know your legacy is worth a fortune. That is exactly what's happened. Behind all the glitz and glam of comic conventions, there were serious allegations of elder abuse. People around him, including business managers and even some family members, were allegedly taking advantage of his weakened state. And yo, it wasn't just a rumor. There is some pretty damning footage that's been gathered by his longtime assistant and friend, John Bolozak. John was in his inner circle, traveling with Stan and filming every single thing. The highs of his incredible career and the lows of his final days. Now, here's where things get super messed up. John held on to all this footage for years. Imagine, if you were in his shoes, you see your best friend being treated like a piece of merchandise, and instead of blowing the whistle or calling in some serious help, you just keep it all on the tape. Then, years later, out of nowhere, you decide to release it in a Kickstarter campaign for a documentary called Stan Lee, the Final Chapter. Like bro, why wait so long? If you had all this evidence, why not drop it immediately to expose the abuse instead of turning it into a fundraiser to pay for fancy production costs and CGI reenactments? That's the wild part. The documentary isn't just a heartfelt tribute, it's a full-on expose of how Stan Lee, in his final years, was exploited by the very same people who were supposed to be taking care of him. The footage shows Stan being paraded at comic cons despite his failing health, forced into signing autographs when he was clearly exhausted, and even manipulated into doing things he might not have wanted to. It's like watching a superhero who created worlds being used as a prop in someone else's twisted scheme, and the rewards on the Kickstarter? Oh man, they are next level weird. You get reward tiers that include everything from exclusive photo comic to tours of Los Angeles, tours that promise to show you the very same spots where Stan was allegedly taken advantage of. It's like turning elder abuse into a collector's item, and that's just straight up disturbing. You've got to understand, this isn't just about one man's personal tragedy, it's about a system that lets people with money and power override the dignity of those who have given so much to the world. Stan Lee's legacy is enormous. He's the father of Marvel, the man who made us dream of heroes. Yet, in his final moments, instead of being celebrated and cared for, he was reduced to a tool for profit by opportunists who saw dollar signs everywhere. I mean, think about it. Stan spent his whole life creating stories about heroes fighting for justice, and in the end, he was caught up in a real-life battle where the villains weren't masked criminals, but rather the very people who should have been his protectors. And yo, let's talk about the ethical mess of using crowdfunding to finish a project like this. Sure, Kickstarter is a great way to get independent projects off the ground, but when it comes to something as sensitive as Stan Lee's final years, it starts to feel off. It's like you're asking fans to chip in to fund a high-budget productions that means to honor his legacy, yet at the same time, you're profiting off on his suffering. The reward tiers are wild, from NFTs to expensive tours, and it just makes you wonder if this is just really about justice for Stan, or if it's just another form of exploitation dressed up as a tribute. Imagine being one of Stan's lawyers back then, or one of his trusted friends, and watching all of this go down. You'd probably be screaming at the top of your lungs, hey, this isn't what Stan wanted. But then, maybe out of fear, or maybe because you didn't want to rock the boat, you just keep quiet. That silence, that inaction, is part of what makes these stories so tragic. Stan Lee's final years were marred by a culture of silence and opportunism, where the people who knew him best either turned a blind eye, or worst yet, actively participated in his exploitation. Now, I'm not here to paint a picture of Stan Lee as some kind of victim who wasn't aware of what was happening. Nah, he was a fighter, a guy who always knew how to spin a good tale and stand up for what he believed in. But it's heartbreaking to see that even someone as resilient as Stan eventually got caught up in a web of deceit, where loyalty was swapped in for a cash and care was traded for convenience. And let's be real, the fact that all this only came to light years after his passing just adds salt to the wound. As we dig deeper into these dark final moments, we can't ignore the irony. The man who helped create superheroes ended up being treated like a superhero who got betrayed by his own sidekicks. It's a bitter pill to swallow, but it shines a light on the harsh realities of fame, aging, and the greed that can lag behind even the most beloved icons. Stan Lee's story is a reminder that sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought on the pages of a comic book, but in the quiet, desperate moments of real life. So, here is what I am saying. Stan Lee gave us worlds full of wonder and hope, and he deserves to be remembered with the utmost respect and care. His dark final moments shouldn't be forgotten or sanitized. Instead, they should serve as a wake-up call to all of us about how easily exploitation can creep into even the most hallowed halls of creativity. We need to ask ourselves tough questions. Who are the real villains in this story? Is it the corporate giants, the opportunistic managers, or the system that allows them to thrive at the expense of those who build the very foundations of our pop culture? In wrapping this up, just imagine Stan Lee in those final moments, a man whose mind once raced with the dreams of 1,000 heroes, reduced to a shadow of his former self by those who saw him only as means to an end. It's a story of betrayal and heartbreak, but also of a legacy that continues to inspire even when tainted by the scars of exploitation. So, as we look back at the final chapters of Stan Lee's life, let's remember not just the man who gave us Spider-Man and the Avengers, but also the human being who deserved so much more than what was handed to him in his last days. And if there is one thing we can take away from this wild ride through Stan Lee's final moments, it is this: no amount of legendary status can shield you from the dark underbelly of greed and manipulation. The very people who were supposed to honor his legacy ended up tarnishing it with their selfish pursuits. So next time you pick up a comic or watch a blockbuster, just remember the real story behind the scenes. A story of a hero who wasn't immune to the cruelty of the world he helped create. Peace out, and let's keep Stan's memory alive by calling out the injustices and standing up for the ones who've given us so much. After all, heroes aren't just made on the pages of comics, they're made by the way we treat each other in the real world.